only care about the choice. I want to know why, because you are such a potent sense maker. There's so many of us that are like children of Sam Harris, where you really helped us think about putting these ideas together. And then there's something in this 1-2 punch of COVID, Trump, where all of a sudden I felt like, wait, I've been using the tools you gave me, and now the way that now I feel like you're using a different set of tools. And so I'm trying to remap, because here's how I approach you right now. Obviously, I've watched some portion of the internet go, Sam's brain broke. He used to be Sam Harris, not Sam Harris. You did your own podcast about it, which is brilliant, by the way, where you're like, some portion of my audience thinks like, what have you done? I forget the exact phrase you used, but like, you're so aware of how people have responded, but you've stayed really steady. So I'm like, okay, then maybe there's something here I'm just not getting, which is why I keep laying my thing out, because you don't feel erratic to me, but I want to understand you're layering ideas that allow you to make sense of this in a way where you're calm. Like, if people are going to freak out on Twitter, I'm just going to step back. I'm going to keep doing my thing. Like, being with you does not feel like I'm in the presence of someone who's on a manic episode or anything. Like, you feel as ever sort of calm and centered. And so because I am skeptical of my own approach, I want to understand yours. Now, I'm not going to pull back on the parts where I think that it doesn't make sense. I'll say it doesn't make sense, but I actually do want to understand. So where I was going with that is, I don't worry about illegal, not illegal. I just want to know why you think it makes sense to deplatform, or to not platform, maybe a more accurate way to say it, to not platform someone like RFK Jr. when the founding fathers said, hey, the one thing you don't want to fuck with, make sure people can say whatever the hell they want.
Okay, well, it matters what the platform is. So, with a podcast, it's very simple. I'm only going to do 40, 50 podcasts this year. I just have to make a choice. It's an editorial choice. It's a publishing choice. What do I want to pay attention to? Whose book do I want to read? Who do I want to talk to? Most people.
But you have said there are certain people you don't think should be put on a platform. Trump was one of them.
There's certain people I wouldn't talk to for specific reasons. Right?
You're not talking fair enough, but are there people that you think should never be platformed?
Well, I think if you're going to platform it, so what I said about RFK on my podcast is if you're going to platform him, you have a journalistic responsibility to do your homework, not only in anticipation of the things he's going to say on your podcast, but you need to catalog the things he's already said, which are obviously bullshit, that you should challenge him on, right? So, there is just a widespread scientific consensus at this point that there is no link between childhood vaccines and autism. Right now, autism is a problem. Autism rates have gone up. We don't understand autism, but people have gone deep studying the MMR vaccine, but just vaccines in general, and autism, and found no linkage, right? So, and he is out there telling people, anyone who will listen, that there's every reason to believe that vaccines cause autism, or we should be worried about it, or I'm hearing from mothers who have seen the clear correlation. They had a normal kid on Tuesday, and on Wednesday they got vaccinated, and the autism started, right? So he is spreading that fear, and as far as I can tell, it's on the basis of no valid scientific information now. Now it's also, this is now linked up with everyone else's concerns about COVID vaccines and just the reliability of medicine in general, and bad incentives and pharmaceutical companies, and there's a lot of there in stuff that's worth worrying about. And I think a profit-driven motive in medicine is something that we're always going to be in tension with, because what we want is we want the medical establishment to be recommending drugs because they're safe and truly safe and effective to people who truly need them, right? We don't want people in the privacy of their own minds or in the privacy of their board meetings celebrating how they're going to make billions of dollars at this new opportunity because they can market this drug successfully to people who may not need it, may not benefit from it, maybe in fact be harmed by it, right? So it's that disalignment of incentives that is specific in the case of medicine that is, I think people are understandably uncomfortable with. But so in the narrow case, when you're talking about having a podcast, you first of all, you can just, the burden is not on you to platform everybody. You can just decide who you want to talk to. If you're going to talk to someone like RFK Jr., I think, given his track record and given how much, I think, genuine misinformation he has spread, and consequential misinformation, I think you have a responsibility not to just put a mic in front of him and let him rip. You actually need to debunk him and maybe bring on someone who can also debunk him. Now, again, as I said,
you have no problem with that. So if it was done in a debate format with another expert or superior expert, then we're good.
Yes, except the asymmetry I pointed out before still applies. I mean, if he's going to just make stuff up, right? So he will. I mean, the example I mentioned on my podcast, he's been telling a story, I think, in several venues that, he collaborated with the journalist Jake Tapper, like 15 years ago on a documentary. They just put in a ton of effort. They did a really deep dive on the link between vaccines and autism, and at the last minute, Jake Tapper called them and said, "Listen, we're going to pull this. I've never, in all my years as a journalist, I've never had this experience, but this just came down from corporate. They're just pulling the plug on this. I'm so sorry." And so the punchline for him, and I'm not sure if he said this on Rogan. He definitely said this on some podcasts I listened to. Punchline for him is, okay, the pharmaceutical companies have such pull. They spend so much money with CNN and these other outlets that if they don't want something to air, it's not going to air. Right? That's how corrupt journalism is now. Now, if I was on a podcast debating RFK Jr. and he trotted out that story, I would just have to eat it. I would say, all right, man, well, that's bad. I agree, that looks bad, right? Now, Jake Tapper has published an article saying this is just a lie. right? This is just like, this has like 2% relationship to what actually happened. There was nothing about it being, it's just, it's all upside down. And I keep debunking this, and he keeps telling this story, right? So unless you know that, it doesn't matter that you're a vaccine expert, or you could be an expert in a dozen relevant disciplines. If someone's just going to make up a story that is perfectly shaped to tickle the contrarian, they're all a bunch of fucking liars part of the brain, he still lands that blow in real time on a podcast. There's no way to debunk it in real time. You literally need Jake Tapper you need to pull him out of the woodwork for that particular point.
But isn't
and
some
there are many things like that. That's the thing. I mean,
right.
It's not like, so someone who has this style of reasoning, again, some of it's conscious lying, some of it's misremembering, some of it's they're reading studies and they're not understanding them, and they're pulling half truths out of studies that can be made to seem real, and so they're making such a mess that it is genuinely hard to be an expert in that, riding shotgun and all of that and debunking in real time. But the only responsible way to do it would be to have an expert there to try to do that. I think it's worth stepping back and asking the question, well, why is anyone listening to RFK Jr. about vaccines at all? Right? He's not an expert in the relevant domain, right? He's not an expert in epidemiology. He's not an expert in immunology. He's not a vaccine guy. He's a lawyer and an activist who got this particular bee in his bonnet 20 years ago, and he's just made a lot of noise about this. And interestingly, he's also a climate science activist, right? And there you can see a very bizarre mismatch between how he deals with mainstream scientific consensus in climate and how he disavows mainstream scientific consensus on the topic of vaccines. And I mean, everything is flipped. I mean, he's just like, he's got all
this is the perfect example for me of the very thing that I'm worried about. So here you have a guy, he's either sinister and wants to help the climate, in which case I think most people have cognitive dissonance, or he's sinister and wants people to not take vaccines that are going to save their life, or he's maybe right about something that other people disagree with, or maybe he's wrong but well-intentioned. So
I think wrong but well-intentioned covers for a lot. I mean, just think about it. The vaccine thing is really a unique case, because what you have is an intervention on a healthy person, very often a child, that is nevertheless risky to some degree. Some number of people are going to have a bad reaction. Some number of people are going to die from this is just everyone's worst, certainly every parent's worst nightmare. I let them stick a needle in my child, and he was never the same, or he died. Right? Like, that's just, so you just have to hear one story like that, right? It doesn't have to happen to you. It's just it could be a friend of a friend of a friend. You hear this story and you think, man, it's not worth it. Like, I don't. In the case of childhood illness, infectious disease, you can, as basically everyone who doesn't get their kids vaxxed does, you can just be a free rider on this larger system of herd immunity. You can say, listen, most people are going to be vaccinated for measles. I don't even have to get my kid vaccinated. Like, I'm not going to run this risk. I'm just going to opt out. And so he's intersecting with totally understandable fears that wherein specific anecdotes, specific stories get amplified they're above data. They're more important than data. You can show me all the data in the world. I know what happened to my kid, right? That's, again, scientifically, that's all upside down, but it is so compelling that...
What should we do, though, with people that are in that situation? Because for me, if a parent doesn't want to vaccinate their child, I do not think you should be able to force them. Even at the height of COVID, where I was like, when I really believed everybody just needs to go get vaccinated, and some people were like, I don't want to do it, I was like, word, then fine. Like, that just feels, so it felt wrong to me, and this is where it feels like everybody needs to have a moral compass. Part of where I think the breakdown is happening, I've heard you refer to something as a great unraveling. Now, I don't know what you mean by that, but I started mapping out what I thought you meant by that. And one of the things that certainly I would mean is a great unraveling is we don't have these shared morals anymore. We don't have one religion to carry us through, and because what I think ends up happening, and the thing you and I have been talking about without really talking about, is this is a battle for the truth. If things were clear, they'd be clear. Like, if we really knew, like, vaccines don't cause autism, like, if vaccines cause autism, it'd be very clear. You just see it, boom, done, right? So it's in some sort of weird, like, maybe it does. Like, there's enough credibility there that people can still buy into it. There isn't enough just like unequivocal evidence in the other direction. People go, I've looked at this. Because if it were true, I could just show you this, and I could show you this, and then people would go down the line. Nobody's arguing about whether what you eat impacts what you shit, right? Everybody just gets it. I don't have to tell anybody. I don't have to go convince people. It's just like your life is such proof that there is a one-to-one relationship between what you put in your mouth and what comes out the other end. So there is some weird gray area. So the question becomes...
It's mostly gray area for most things.
Right. So now, if we know we're living in this area where everything is gray, nobody knows who's going to be the expert. You started the conversation by saying, okay, we really do need experts, but no joke, like 9 words into your sentence, you were caveating experts have sort of thrown away their credibility. And so it's like, that is the world that we live in. Like, this stuff is so complex. So the thing that we have to take on in head-on collision is, how do we discover what is true?
Well, if you do it the way RFK Jr. is doing it for climate, right? Like, you notice that you can find
believe the preponderance of
Yeah,
experts.
it's like, it's not an accident that almost all climate scientists, right? I mean, there's a general principle you have to understand here, is that it's always possible to find a handful of PhDs or MDs who are crazy. or conflicted, or just for whatever reason disposed to stake out a genuinely disreputable and indefensible thesis. You could always, so the cigarette companies could always find somebody with a seemingly relevant degree to say, I don't think smoking causes cancer, I don't think it's addictive, you could find that guy, and then that guy would sell his wares to the chemical companies that are putting fire retardant in mattresses, and he could say, well, I don't think this is if it gets into the bloodstream, it's not a problem. Right? You can always find those people. So I'm not saying we are always ruled by scientific consensus, because there are genuine breakthroughs in science and that overturn even a 99.9% consensus. But scientific consensus is still salient and still matters most of the time, and it's not arrived at by accident. And there's so much tension in science to disprove other scientists, right? There's so it is such a competitive atmosphere that, again, there are studies that don't get replicated. There's false ideas that survive far longer than you think they would. But generally speaking, you are not going to go wrong most of the time by lining up with what 99% of specialist X thinks on this very specialized topic. So RFK Jr. plays that very center of the fairway game on the topic of climate, and he does something completely different when he's talking about medicine. Now, I don't know, maybe he has a story that reconciles that difference, but we need a healthy institutional and scientific conversation such that good ideas generally survive and bad ideas are generally debunked, and that we know that most of the time our experts are real experts. They got that, they acquired their expertise by a process that was going to weed out the imbeciles and the delusional, and deliver somebody who really is arriving at their opinions on the basis of a methodology that we generally can trust, right? They're not obviously conflicted by.
Can we lay out that methodology?
Well, it's you're on guard for obvious cognitive bias and wishful thinking and certainly bad incentives, right? So it's understand, it's like, yes, if R.J. Reynolds is funding research into the toxicology of cigarettes, right? It's not to say that obviously conflicted money has always been fun to study that is false, right? I mean, you could run it. Wouldn't be hard to run a totally valid study where the money came from what would classically be considered the wrong source. But it's easy to see that there's at least the optics are bad enough that that's not how you want to fund that particular science, right? And at minimum, scientists have to declare any economic interest they had in any part of this picture. But the truth is, science is deeply flawed. And yet, it's better than any other part of culture with respect to how we play this game of just letting ideas collide against one another and seeing what survives.
That I agree with. So the problem is I don't feel like that's what's happening or what's being championed. So broadly, and then we can get specific to you and I and exactly what we're saying. But the way that I think about this is you've got even something like science. If you talk to Eric Weinstein, he talks about the DISC, I think it's the Distributed Information Suppression Complex. So he talks about how there is, for whatever reason, just inherent into the world of science, there's a certain bias, there's certain ideas they don't want getting out because people have built their entire careers on something, and if you're putting something forth that challenges it, not necessarily that they're being evil, but it's the same kind of idea of the cigarette guy is going to see what he wants to see, and the guy whose entire career collapses if your new idea is right, well, magically the peer review that you get is terrible, and he's got a laundry list of things like that. And so I'll back up. So in a business context, I created something called the Physics of Progress. And it was me trying to teach to my students exactly how you solve novel problems. So I was like, hey, if you want to grow a business, I have no idea what the product is, how the audience is going to respond, what the market situation is going to be like. So you really have to understand how to think through new business, new product, new era, new market dynamics, whatever. And the way that you do that is Physics of Progress. And I laid this whole thing out, and I'm super proud of it, and I'm pitching it to my team. And I'm like, okay, you're going to start with where are you trying to get to? What's your goal? You're going to identify the obstacle between where you're at and your goal. And like, why won't I just automatically achieve my goal? Then you're going to come up with a experiment that you can run, a thing that you can do to try to overcome that obstacle. You're going to do that thing, you're going to look at the data, figure out whether you made meaningful progress. You're going to then reinform your hypothesis about how to overcome that obstacle, and you're going to start over. And one of the guys on my team goes, that's the scientific method. And I was like, is it? I actually don't know the scientific method. And he's like, yeah, that's the scientific method. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. To me, that's it. The reason that I called it the physics of progress, and again, just completely acknowledging it's the scientific method, but the reason that it occurred to me as a physics of progress is because it is the only way to make progress. That you're not going to know. You're just taking your best guess. You know where you're trying to get to. You have a guess about what the thing is that's stopping you. You're going to try something. The problem is when I teach this, the big issue is when going back to what I was saying is truth. Truth is perception, interpretation, and reinforcement. And at the moment you look at the data, so I ran my test to see if I could overcome that obstacle, I get a result. when I look at that data, I'm bringing my perception, my interpretation, and my reinforcement to that. And it's not that I'm evil, but I'm not necessarily going to see what's true. And this is where science then begins to break down. It is the right answer. Like, it is what we need to do. As far as I can tell, it's the only way to make progress in anything. But what we're living through right now is that moment of the interpretation, the perception, and the reinforcement causes you to see something that's not actually there. You're looking at the world through a funhouse mirror. And so sorry, 1 second, let me bring this all together. The one thing that I live in perpetual fear of is that you have the guy, the doctor, you'll probably remember his name, I don't, who was like, you know what, I think after you do an autopsy, you need to wash your hands before you give birth to somebody. What, Semmelweis? Semmelweis. So Semmelweis goes and tells people this, hey, I think this is causing the death of mothers. We really have to start washing hands. People make fun of him, lambast him, drive him into an insane asylum where he dies before it's discovered, oh yeah, germ theory, he was right. And so that's how wrong this goes. I don't think that humans have changed. I think that we still have that reaction where it's like, they're not necessarily even trying to be mean. It just doesn't make sense and it to them. And it would cause like all these changes and we don't really know that this is a thing. And so to me, the people that want to make the decisions, they lack the humility to recognize the odds of me being wrong border on 100%. Not on everything, but when you take everything in totality, you're going to be wrong, and you just don't know about which things. And so if I'm thinking, okay, you put forth your idea, we need experts, we need an institutional response that we can trust. My thing would be, the closest thing I could imagine to that, you have to red team, blue team. You've got to get somebody like RFK Jr. who really believes this is a problem. This is really causing autism. And then you debate it with data that you predict ahead of time. So it comes down to, okay, what was your prediction? What did you think was going to happen? Then you run the experiment. Did it actually happen, yes or no? And then both sides, because when you look at the data, is the point at which you're most likely to make your errors, bring your biases, all that. You look at the data, and then you try to go with a consensus. Now, I don't see any way, and Klein is a great one to talk about, I don't see any way to stop all kinds of prolonged debate, but then you hope that when there really is evidence, that it starts to be just one by one, all the detractors start falling away, it becomes too self-evident, and then you really can get something approaching consensus in action.
Yeah, well, so let me see if I can just isolate what we're disagreeing about here, because you seem to be imagining that we can have an information landscape, whether let's say it's on a platform like Twitter or YouTube, where it's as flat as, but like there's as much, no one's doing anything deliberate to tune the signal to noise ratio, right? Because to do that would be to be biasing it.
The honest answer is, I think people are hyper-biased. So that is factored into, while I didn't talk about that, it's factored into how I think you have to let the ideas battle. So that the wiser, more eloquent fighters, and I think this is probably a lot of some people's pushback on you stepping back somewhat, exiting Twitter, because they were like, you were the guy I counted on to be able to throw and dodge punches and bring humor and all of that. And so we've lost one of the great fighters of this, and that gets hard because I don't see myself as talented enough in the idea of public opinion to do that. So you have to have people that can dismantle these ideas. Like, I've seen you on stage do this, particularly with religion, which is outside of where we're at right now in the conversation, but where you've been funny and it's shareable. The clips themselves are amazing because they hit and they shake you up, but they're easy to transmit and remember. And so when you find a great orator, Douglas Murray is another guy that can really do this. That feels to me, and I know you keep saying I'm not the guy to think through COVID or whatever, and I'm like, actually, so as long as it's people who are disagreeing respectfully, who care about truth, you have to, as the individual, care about truth, and you have to not pride yourself on being right, you have to pride yourself on identifying the right answer. But I have a feeling that experts almost need that external panel of people who are like, I'm not invested in this, but I know how to think through novel problems. Here's how I'm parsing this data. Let me ask you really pointed questions, give me your feedback, and then I'll triangulate on an answer. That feels like, in the reality of how ideas win at scale, that feels the closest to true. But it requires people to be able to say whatever the hell they want, that they don't get booted, kicked off, silenced, whatever.
Well, but so let's just take that last claim first. All of these platforms have to kick people off for specific violations of the terms of service, right? You need some terms of service. As far as I know, even 4chan has a terms of service. Right? I think maybe 8chan doesn't, but like, if you want to be more extreme than 4chan, you have to go somewhere else.
So I will give you barriers must be put up. Now, where we put the barriers, we are going to.
But the moment you concede that, right, then you recognize that there's absolutely nothing novel about what Elon is doing on Twitter. He's just biasing it in a way that he likes better than the previous bias, right? So he brought Kanye on knowing he was an anti-Semite, and then Kanye did something and he kicked him off because he realized, okay, I can't really have this happening on my platform. And so it is. I mean, he's cozying up to sort of QAnon lunatics, and he may not even know who he's signal boosting. He's just like, glad handing somebody who said something he thought was clever, sent him a meme he thought was clever, and he's actually signal boosting somebody who's just odious in their ideological commitments and in their lying about everything under the sun, right? And I'm not saying Elon's actually paying attention to all that, but he's doing something incredibly ad hoc and sloppy, and it's still not free speech absolutism, right? Free speech absolutism just doesn't exist. It doesn't even exist on 4chan. As far as I know, I had this on just good faith that I'm never on I don't think I've been on 4chan ever, but I think it has a terms of service, and that's why 8chan was spawned. It's like in protest over the puritanical control on 4chan. So what you seem to be recommending is the 4chanification or the 8chanification of everything, and what that would be, in my view, if that were happening on YouTube and TikTok and Twitter and Threads and everywhere else, it would be a maximally noisy, uncivil space, right? So it'd be hard, it would get hard insofar as you achieve that ideal of no libtard institutional bias, right? We're just gonna let it rip, right? Anyone with anything to say gets equal chance to say it. What you're gonna have there is just pure cacophony, and it's gonna be harder and harder to find the signal in the noise, right? So the moment you admit that, you admit you're in the business of favoring certain voices over others, platforming and even deplatforming people when they prove on the 10th infraction that they're truly beyond the pale and just committed to making a mess, right? And what I experienced, so my leaving Twitter was just it was much more of a personal decision. It wasn't a decision that it was just a decision about how I was going to spend my time and attention ultimately. But I mean, the reason why I didn't see a benefit to my staying there is that it's just the wrong space in which to try to have a conversation, like a conversation that converges on anything useful on these kinds of topics, right? Really any polarizing topic. Because I tried. I mean, it was the only social media platform that I ever used personally. I mean, I'm on others, but those are just marketing channels, and I never see them. But it was really me on Twitter. I was really trying to make sense to people. What I was getting back was just this tsunami of bad faith attacks and craziness. And what was actually exploding was not just headlines that were false, but like in the final case, it was a clip of me on another podcast which was genuinely misleading as to what I said in context on that podcast. But it simply didn't matter because the clip itself seemed intelligible enough, it seemed clear enough what I was saying within the clip that people they didn't even want to hear that there was a context.
Is this the Hunter Biden thing?
Yeah,
the Biden laptop?
So they didn't they didn't want to hear, and even like no one has the bandwidth to go back and find the context for the thing that they just reacted to that just primed all their satisfied all their salt and sugar and fat receptors. So when you ask like what my principles are, my general principle is to be very on guard for doing that sort of thing myself. So like even when there's somebody who I know I understand and revile appropriately, somebody like Trump, I'm still on guard for the clip of him that is actually misleading, right? And I will actually defend him as much as I find him indefensible. I've burned a fair amount of reputational capital over here on the left by defending him on specific points when I felt that the attack on him was just based on lies, right? So like when he gave a press conference after Charlottesville and said that there were good people on both sides, and he seemed to be saying in that clip that the neo-Nazis are good people, right? And that was spun politically from everyone from Biden on down. It was spun by the New York Times. I mean, literally, if I had to bet, 95% of the commentariat left of center still thinks he was praising neo-Nazis in that press conference. And yet within the context of the press conference, it's absolutely clear that he's not doing that, right? He says, within 20 seconds of the clip piece, he says, I'm not talking about the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis. I'm talking about other people who were there, who were just worried about monuments getting torn down. And so I think we have to acknowledge that we're in a media landscape now where people are being reliably misled by clips. So the underlying ethic here is that when people are arguing in a partisan way, they don't really care what their enemy has said or meant to say. What they want to do is they want to hold them to the worst possible interpretation of what they said and make that stick, right? And the game is just see if you can make it stick. See if you can. So I've made this claim, for years now, and this is more based on what happens to me from the left as opposed to the right. And the example we're talking about now is sort of defamation coming from the right. But I've made this point before, and this is it's an inconvenient point to make because like even this can get clipped out to my disadvantage. But it's worth saying because this shines as bright as possible a light on what everyone is doing, and many good people are doing it kind of unthinkingly. But so I've long known, for at least 8 years or so, I've known that I'm in an environment where if I say on my podcast, black people are apes, white people are apes, we're all apes, racism doesn't make any sense, right? There are some considerable number of people who will clip out me saying black people are apes or make a meme, black people are apes, Sam Harris, right? And they will export that to their channels apparently with a clear conscience saying this is fair game, right? And that's the kind of people I was dealing with on Twitter. And that's kind of the person who clipped that clip from that podcast is exactly that sort of person. And he was being signal boosted by lots of other people we could name. And so I just recognize that this is it's just the wrong occasion to try to have a conversation with people. It's built into the dynamics of the system where people are incentivized just to dunk on everybody, however dishonestly, and then move on. And and part of the pathology I saw with Elon taking over the place was not so much what he was doing to the place as its owner, but just how he was behaving personally on the platform himself. I mean, he was doing the same thing. One of the first things he did after he took over Twitter was he spread this meme about Nancy Pelosi's husband, after the hammer attack on him. Like, it's not what it seems. This could have been a gay tryst gone awry. And he linked to a website that had an article to that effect. This was a website which during the 2016 election claimed that Hillary Clinton was dead and that a body double was campaigning in her place, right? So Elon links to that as a source, right? In front of, at that point, probably 110 million people, amplifying a completely crazy conspiracy theory that's getting spun up in QAnon circles. And then when that gets pointed out to him, just how wrong all of that was and how irresponsible it was, he never corrects the record, he never apologizes, he never changes his appetite for doing that again. In that case, I think he just deleted the tweet, right, and moved on. And so it's like even people who reputationally have a tremendous amount to lose by behaving that way, you would think, are goaded into behaving that way because of the mechanics of the platform. And so, for me personally, I simply don't understand how people have audiences that will still follow them after they prove that they don't care to make any of these distinctions. I mentioned Tucker Carlson. The fact that behind closed doors, he's saying that Trump is a demonic force, and then in front of the camera, he's basically messaging to Trumpistan 85% of the time, in a very supportive way. I don't understand how, like, in front of my audience, if a similar thing were revealed about me, my audience would just completely disavow me. I mean, there'd be it would be a complete breach of trust with my audience, and that's the way I think it should be. But Alex Jones, Alex Jones has an audience of some tens of millions of people. In the aftermath of Sandy Hook, right? When he has lied and lied and lied about Sandy Hook being a false flag, fake, confection of the Obama administration. They're all crisis actors. The kids never died, or it's like I don't know how how deep those claims went, but some version of that, right? Like none of this is as it seems. He created immense harm, demonstrable harm with all the Sandy Hook families. These are families, in many cases, they've had to move homes. Some have moved homes 10 times since he started spreading those lies about them. All of this gets kind of forensically documented at trial. He gets $1 billion judgment against him. How does he still have an audience? Right? Like, who are these people who are still listening to him?
Is that legitimately confusing? Because that one to me is very clear. He's entertaining.
All these people are mentally ill, or like what?
No,
what is this?
Because I don't know Rogan well at all. But Rogan keeps having him on. I don't know if he has recently, but he thinks he's funny
since then. But
yeah, I don't know. But certainly my take is that people find him amusing. He's funny, and he's gotten enough weird stuff right that people are like, all right, look, he missed. I know literally nothing about the Sandy Hook stuff, so I'm certainly not defending that.
Right.
I'm just saying I understand the phenomenon. The phenomenon is that this is an age where the algorithm is a big part of the piece of information. And so the reason that certain people become the voice is that they also are able to speak in a way that people find really compelling, entertaining, engaging. And so that person is going to keep going. Alex has a way of delivering information that's zany, it's crazy, it's over the top, you can't believe it's real, he's funny, he's fun to make fun of. And there are enough things that people he gets memed, right? It's like another crazy thing that he said 5 years ago just, came true. And so he's a bit like the Simpsons, in that people be like, yo, Simpsons 12 years ago predicted this thing. You're like, that's insane. So same thing with Alex. But now that doesn't mean that he isn't a destructive force. It just means that it's very easy for me to see why he's entertaining enough that people are going to keep going back to him.
You can reboot your life, your health, even your career, anything you want. All you need is discipline. I can teach you the tactics that I learned while growing a billion-dollar business that will allow you to see your goals through. If you want better health, stronger relationships, a more successful career, any of that is possible with the mindset and business programs in Impact Theory University. Join the thousands of students who have already accomplished amazing things. Tap now for a free trial and get started today.
I'll grant you the entertainment component, especially in his case, but in his case, perhaps to a lesser degree, but certainly in Tucker's case, there's this pretense of, I'm just giving you honest information, right? I'm just calling it as I see it. Like, this is just, like, what you see is what you get. There's not, like, there's a fundamental integrity to the message. That's what his audience seems to think they're getting. And then we know that he is a completely different person behind closed doors.
I can explain that one as well. Yeah. So you've got, all right, we all know I'm just giving you what a dyed-in-the-wool red Republican is going to say. They shouldn't be looking at his private communications. And
that's a way of not taking the knowledge on board.
Correct.
But,
I'm not saying it's the right way. I'm just saying this is how he keeps his audience. They shouldn't be looking at his private communications. This is exactly what Trump has been warning us about, people getting into your private life, governmental overreach, all of that. And then, of course, he's going to fight for Republican values. Even if he thinks that the leadership isn't great and that he'd rather have somebody else, he knows that lying on behalf of a guy that he thinks is demonic, but at least he's Republican, is better than the outright dangerous, I don't know what words they use for othering the Joe Biden camp, but that's how it's going to be. That you would much rather, it was like when Trump said that, yes, I'm a bully, but I'm a bully for you. It was like, okay, sure, Tucker's not perfect. Sure, he lied to present things well, but I'm kind of glad he did because I need him to represent our side. We have to win against the other people. Like, there's this real escalating sense of like, we have to win. The stakes really matter. And in fact, going back to that idea of if I look at, so I watched the whole interview that you did where you were talking about the Hunter Biden laptop. And so I'm watching it with an open mind and just like, just a ton of respect for you, Sam. I cannot stress it enough. Before, after, this minute, a year from now, I just can't fathom not really being blown away by how you think and all the meditation stuff. You seem sincerely to want to help people. So it's very easy for me to go, okay, I think I get where you're going with this. But for me to interpret that moment the way that you did, this is why I said this is about stopping evil. To me, your interpretation of Trump is that either because he's just a clown on the loose, a dangerous troll, or because he's actually nefarious. Either one has the same outcome, so I doubt you split real hairs with that. But he cannot be in control of this company. It is, I don't know if you go all the way to existential, thank you, this country. I don't know if you go all the way to existential or not, but it's like, it's so high risk, finger on the nukes, asking questions like, why do I have less nukes than JFK back in the 60s? Like, this is as close to unhinged narcissism as you're gonna get. It's too dangerous. We are now at a point where, hey, everybody, yeah, fine. I will step forward and say that there should be a small group of people that just keep us from this lunacy. And if that means that we have to not necessarily bury the laptop, but you cannot let it come out right in a moment where it could possibly sway the election and put that psychopath back in. Right. Now, that's where I say that is way more dangerous. And now we can at least talk about what we disagree on. To me, the authoritarian nature of like, I and some small group of people have decided that Trump is that dangerous and have decided that this laptop revealing at this moment would be dangerous to the Democratic candidacy. So whatever it is that we have to suppress it. Now,
well, I should be clear about what my position actually was at the time and what I was actually saying on that podcast, not especially well. My position was, it was always a hard judgment call at that point. We're talking about 10 days before the election. This thing comes, it's clearly an October surprise, foisted on us, timed intentionally to be hard to parse right before the election. It's just like, we're on Rudy Giuliani's timetables. Like, this is when I'm going to show you the laptop, right? You got 10 days to figure this out. It was meant to detonate politically at that point. And we already knew what happens in the 2016 election, when 10 days before an election, you say, hey, we got Anthony Weiner's laptop and now we're reopening the email investigation to Hillary Clinton. We saw that was, her poll numbers, like by the hour, went down. Whether that was decisive or not, who knows? She was unelectable for other reasons. But so we had so my claim at the time was, it was totally understandable for journalists to say, we're not going to be hostage to Rudy Giuliani's timetable here. We have an election in 10 days. First, do no harm. Let's just give this. Let's wait for 3 weeks to figure out what's true about this laptop. Right? We can't figure out whether this is a Russian forgery. Like this, there's reasons to be concerned that it could be Russian disinformation. Who knows what's going on here? We should not be in a rush to create a disaster here politically. So it was, and so I viewed each of these platforms having different choices to make. So journalists could decide, do we want to focus on this now, or do we want to give this a little more breathing room? That was an editorial choice that I completely understood, and still a genuine hard call. Then you have Twitter deciding not only to whether or not to amplify certain things, they decide to deplatform the New York Post that had a journalist who decided to write about the story, right? That was a very different decision, and I think almost certainly the wrong decision, right? I mean, again, understandable given the political bias of the people on Twitter and given the genuine uncertainty as to the ground truth of the validity of the information and where that laptop came from. And I think even in that case, on the New York Post story, one of the reporters who reported it out didn't want to sign his name to the article. I mean, like, it was the Wild West over there in terms of actually, doing the journalism. So it's, in my view, it was a coin toss as to what to do there. Now, if you raise the stakes more, right, you make Trump even more sinister, you make the election even more tenuous, you make the information even more dubious, then the dials change. And so many of these decisions are not decisions you can make categorically in principle. It really is this pragmatic balancing of just what is true and what are the stakes, right? It's like, I'll compare this to another case you spelled out earlier. So you felt that it was obviously wrong to force people to get the mRNA vaccine for COVID, right? Now, I would grant you, certainly in retrospect, that seems true. But if we change a few of the variables, I think your ethical intuitions and certainly political intuitions would totally change. So you make it a much more obviously effective vaccine that really does block transmissions, like a sterilizing vaccine. You make it a much more dangerous virus. You make it a virus that's actually preferentially killing kids rather than old people, right? So now we're in an environment where, like, you're deciding not to get vaccinated is putting my kids at risk, right? Do you get to make that choice, right? And you might say, oh yes, yeah, I should be able to make that choice. It's my body, but dial up the deadliness of the pathogen. Give us something like, airborne Ebola that incubates for a month. You don't know you have it, and you walk around spreading it, and it's got a 75% fatality rate, and it's mostly killing kids. No one gets to make that choice anymore. I mean, then literally the cops come in and vaccinate you, and I would say that all of us would agree to that. The moment, again, that you turn up the lethality on the pathogen, you turn up the effectiveness of the vaccine, you turn down the risk of the vaccine. Give me a truly safe vaccine where there's not even one documented case of vaccine injury, right? So then you just have to be completely crazy to be worried about being vaccinated in that kind of environment. Then it's just a no-brainer. Then we just don't tolerate a diversity of opinion because the stakes are too high. It's a full-on emergency. Bodies of kids are being stacked up in parks, right? There's so many of them, we don't know what to do with them. We've got these mobile morgues, and we have a vaccine that actually works. And then we've got RFK Jr. saying, maybe you don't want, maybe you don't want to get the jab on Rogan's podcast, right? That's the world I've been worried about ever since COVID. Like a world where the truth is really clear, and yet our media environment is so crazy that we can't even talk about it. And we get this. I mean, again, the fact that something like QAnon is possible, right? The fact that we could have a president who messages to QAnon favorably without disavowing any association, right? When asked about QAnon, he says, "Well, they sure seem to like me. They seem like nice people," right? This is a. I mean, some tens of millions of people, it seems. I mean, let's say it's a hardcore of maybe 3 million people. Who knows? Millions of people who believe that the world is being run by child raping cannibals, right? That's like if that is possible in the current system, you just have to imagine what that would do when the stakes are truly high, right? Like when it's part of the machinery of some decision making. And
so I have a slightly different intuition on this. So I like to take the hardest possible look at this thing and then see what I would do. So one, even if you dial it up, it's airborne Ebola, it takes a month, you're walking around, dead kids are being stacked up. I would still let RFK go say, I don't think people should get the jab. But having said that,
what do you mean let? Like
meaning
you would decide to have that conversation, or you just think
on my podcast there should be no law against it?
Right, but so I agree with you there. So like that, where I hold the line with the First Amendment is, yes, you should be able to be as wrong as you want to be, but we don't have to algorithmically boost those errors, right?
Correct.
And if I have a platform, if again I'm creating a social media platform, I don't want the Nazis and I don't want the people who are spreading lies about the current pandemic. That is
where you and I break down is I'm so paranoid that people don't know what a lie is. Right. And so the very thing, and this is why I brought up the Founding Fathers before, the reason that I'm saying I want these people to be able to speak is because I don't know who knows the answer and who doesn't. And so I need the information. Now, over time, certainly for myself, I'll begin to discern who I think is a good faith actor and is really thinking through this problem. And I get that there's going to be people that get caught up in just the speed of it. It's hard to parse who's right and who's just entertaining. And that will be very frustrating, especially if it's my kids that are being stacked up in the park. And I get all of that. But I would also say that if you need those sort of wartime powers, this is Ebola, it's spreading, the deaths are just absolutely outrageous, we have reason to believe that the vaccine is working. While I wouldn't say that people can't speak up, I would be like, you are getting vaccinated or you're getting quarantined in some way, and that would be horrible, and that's really god awful, and it will have absolutely terrible consequences. But I don't want to say that I can't see a world in which I look at it and go, that's the right answer. What I want to talk about is, what am I using to determine that that's the right answer? That's really the thing that I want to talk about, is how we think through these very difficult, very novel problems. And so one of the things that I find interesting is you've got founding fathers and you've got religion. So the founding fathers to me represent a shared narrative about what people ought to be, what the US for sure ought to be in a moralistic sense. Like, how do you structure a government to protect itself from tyranny? How do you recognize the individual people? What ought they be able to pursue without the government being able to interfere with them? Like, what are those bright lines that makes us Americans, riding on the back of freedom and freedom of speech and all of that? Now, of course, crazy, they're doing all this while holding slaves, but they put an idea together that as you adhere to the idea, all that other bullshit starts to fall away. So that to me is a structure of a system that grows better over time. So that's one element, that it's an orienting mechanism where live free or die, right? It's something people were literally willing to give their lives for an idea. That has fallen apart in a way that I don't clearly understand, that I would love you to talk to. The other part of this is religion. Same thing. It's how do you know what is true? In fact, I was thinking about this today. Tell me what you think. I think that religion is the thing that allows you to establish your behavior patterns when truth cannot be scientifically established. So you have religion for the millennia when you couldn't look under a microscope to know about germ theory. So you just said, don't put these fabrics together, don't eat pork, whatever. And ultimately, it was like you knew you were doing the right thing because it was written down in a book or told in an oral story, and you either hewed close to what it said to do and you were doing the right thing, or you didn't and you weren't. And so what I think we're living through now is people realize religion doesn't hold that sort of gravitational center that it used to, because we now do have microscopes and we can really see what the religions were trying to get at. But it did give us a shared narrative that works well for people that are headline readers that can't hold the nuance of the argument. And so they just need 10 commandments. Tell me what to do. And so I know that I'm either in line or not. So now when you're looking at a global pandemic, we don't really know what's going. We don't know the lethality. We don't know if you should get the shot or not. If I can point to religion and say, to be a good Christian, you would get the jab for this reason, I would draw a parallel with one of the stories, then people do it. And now I get people to, of their own accord, out of a desire to adhere to this shared narrative, they do it. And so you see how religion can be this incredible boon, but in a modern era with idea velocity, with hyper fragmentation, driven by algorithms and social media and all of that. Religion is, I need you to speak to this because I don't know the data well enough, losing its power, losing its efficacy. I don't know. It's lost something. It does not have the effect that it used to have. And
Well, I would also say it just doesn't address many of these use cases, right? So like the religion doesn't have a position on vaccines. I mean, there's some religions that might. I mean, Christian scientists would probably not get vaccinated.
don't you agree that
but,
if I'm a preacher, I find the story that I want to draw the parallel.
Yeah,
and
but
so
I think you
even
could
though
probably do it either way. Like you could be against vaccines or pro-vaccines, depending
correct,
on how you pick
correct,
and choose.
but I get you to adhere by, I don't have to use authoritarian rule. That's my
Mm.
point. I don't have to do something top down. What religion allowed you to do was keep the sovereignty of the individual, especially if you're talking about a Christian religion, keep the sovereignty of the individual and yet get them to fall in line. It's really pretty genius, where whether you do it because you believe in America and so you keep your freedoms, but you adhere to the mores that allow this amazing thing to exist that you're proud to be a part of, religion serves the same function. But now as we get into weird, like cultish, new religion, wokeness, whatever you want to call it, something deranges.
Well, so I think, I mean, what you want are principles here. I mean, one principle is I think we should be very wary of being driven by tribalism. Right now, it's not that tribalism is always in every case pathological. I mean, I think there's tribalism we can play at for fun. I mean, it's entertaining and it's not very deep, and yet it can take up a fair amount of bandwidth, and it's fine. So you can be a fan of a sports team. And we know what that looks like when you take it too seriously. I mean, when you're like, you're a South American soccer player and you lose the World Cup, or you commit an own goal or something, and you literally have to worry about getting murdered by your former fans, right? We know that it's gone too far. It's too much like religion in that case. But in the general case, you can play at tribalism, or you can be loosely identified with some subculture, and it can be fun, and you can enjoy the diversity, and the diversity can be somewhat antagonistic, even as it is let's say in sports, right? But no one, it doesn't reach deep into a person's psychology and social network and such that they're making life and death decisions on the basis of how much more they like the Yankees than the Red Sox, say. So tribalism, deeper tribalism is, I think, something we just need to outgrow. Right? The truth is not tribal. The truth is universal, even specific truths. There's some things we know. Diversity of opinion is just a matter of arguments. If we see those truths clearly, we all converge on the same counter ground. You're in Afghanistan, you don't let them get, you don't need them to get out. They can't be out in public, accompanied by a male relative. There's a list of taboos, and most of them are killing offenses. And do we just agree to disagree there? Well, practically now, yes, because we lost that war. We're no longer there. We just don't have, it's not worth sending our sons and daughters to die to defend those girls. But the ground truth is, if you're born a girl in Afghanistan, you are profoundly unlucky, right? That is just that, and that disparity in luck should be galling to all of us, right? Like it's just not a good status quo. Ultimately, if we got our shit together as a species, some subset of women and girls would not be forced to live in cloth bags as they are in Afghanistan at this very moment, right? So ultimately, we will converge, and tribalism is precisely the wrong algorithm to use if you want to converge on the deeper truths, whether they're scientific or ethical, or I would argue even spiritual. That we should organize our beliefs about reality and how to live within it, right? And that's what we're trying. We should recognize that that's what we're trying to do. We are trying to navigate in the space of all possible experience, individually and collectively, and we're trying to figure out what to do next, right? So this is politics. What should we do next? We've got $100 billion to spend this year in the state of California, or whatever it is. I actually don't know what budget is in California, but we've got this money to spend. What should we do with it, right? And then we have diversity of opinion, and in some cases, radical diversity of opinion about what is important and what is even decent to focus on. And I agree with you that a basically free space of conversation is the way we will orient and resolve those disagreements, right? So we need, I do agree that in most cases, we need the conversation just to run long enough and to be uncoerced enough so that most people, most of the time, can notice that the better ideas are surfacing and the bullshit is being moved to the sidelines. But there are still obvious cases where the topic is specialized enough, or the knowledge you need to just get us to have a valid seat at the table is deep enough that not everyone gets to air their opinion with not everyone gets to air their opinion in that particular conversation, or if they do, we're all wise to just have very little patience for that particular opinion, because it's obviously incredible, right? It's obviously it doesn't have, the person doesn't have the right background. They're not playing the language game appropriately. They sound crazy. They have these, they're telegraphing their other ideological commitments that are distracting and not convergent with the actual truth at hand. So it's like, sort of, you bring Alex Jones to the physics conference. It's not going to take him too many minutes to sort of disqualify himself as a expert, a relevant subject matter expert on physics, right, or anything else. And so we live with that tension that, yes, it's in fact true that a Nobel laureate on any given topic can discredit himself with his very next sentence if the sentence is obviously wrong, right? And somebody who knows basically nothing can be right in a debate with this guy by just pointing that out. Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? And it is true from a scientific point of view that we take scientific authority very lightly, right? Like it's not good enough that you're a Nobel laureate. That's not the thing that's going to make you right, right? And you, on some level, you're only as good as your last sentence, right? Like, even if you have a Nobel Prize. And that's how we do, so, a Nobel laureate is giving a lecture in again, it could be on his narrow area of expertise. And at the end of the lecture, hands go up, and it could just be a lowly undergraduate who embarrasses him or her on again, not even on an adjacent topic, on the very topic on which that person became an expert. And that's just because truth is, in fact, orthogonal to any given person's reputation or educational and career achievements, or like, it doesn't matter who you've been. Like, it matters what you're saying right now and why you're saying it, and whether it is connected enough to a chain of reasoning and a chain of evidence that anyone should take it seriously, right? So that's all true, and yet, as a time-saving device, if we have to figure out whether a certain chemical is toxic, we don't want to hear from Alex Jones. We want to hear from the real chemists, right? Yes, we don't want to hear from the chemists who are working for Monsanto if this is a compound that Monsanto is marketing that they stand to make $1 billion on, and we know we don't have good regulations that would force them to do the relevant toxicology and really safeguard human health, right? We know that a lot of the incentives are misaligned such that some of the time, even someone with the right educational background is either lying or impressively self-deceived, and we're getting bad information. And this is what I come back to. What we need in every case here, when things matter, are institutions and regulations and procedures and alignments of incentives that we can actually trust because they're trustworthy, right? Because they are actually reliably keeping bad information out and surfacing good information. And I would admit that we have a highly imperfect system, but the system we have is way better than no system. Right, and I mean, just this is very easy for people to see when you move it out of science and certainly out of medicine, and put it into areas of just like straightforward engineering, like on an airplane, right? So like, people don't tend to be iconoclasts with respect to engineering. Like, when you get on a plane, you don't want to be doing your own research. You don't want to be doing Google searches about plane replacement parts, right? But you just want to know that the FAA has it, right? You want to know that the regulations work. You want to know that the pilots for United don't want to die, right? That they're not going to get on the plane if they think it's unsafe. You want to know that the mechanics are not getting bogus parts because they can shave a profit. They're incentivized. Like, you don't want a system of incentives where we tell the mechanics at Boeing that if you can figure out how to get parts from Malaysia cheaper, right, we're going to let you pocket half of the difference. If you save us $1 million, you get to keep 500,000, right? So get us a landing gear that that somebody 3D printed, in another country, right? If we found out that was how we were incentivizing mechanics, we would go nuts, understandably, right? But presumably we're not doing that. We have to discover as a species all the ways in which we're doing dumb things at a systems level, right? In institutions and in the the systems of incentives that connect institutions. We have to defrag all of that such that mere apes like ourselves can be reliably making better decisions than individuals can tend to make on their own because the systems are so good. And so again, we're not going to solve this in Podcastistan, right, or Substackistan, right? Like, I'm not saying we don't want podcasts and Substack newsletters, but
I think what you can do is delineate how to think about the problem, because here's the last thing on this, and then I've got so many more things I want to talk to you about. But I think because I agree with you as you break down what it should look like, I agree with you. The problem is that the example that you gave that I think really freaked people out was like, this thing isn't going well with the timing of the Trump thing, the Biden laptop. The Trump thing is so serious. I'm going to just real fast break the system to make sure that this doesn't go forward, and that sets everybody's alarm bells off.
But I wasn't. Again, just to be clear, I was not advocating to break anything. I said that Twitter was wrong to deplatform the New York Post.
Right.
The New York Times, I think, was probably, again, and I put it explicitly in these terms, it was a total coin toss for me journalistically, whether you decide to do a front page story on the Hunter Biden laptop with 10 days left when there were valid concerns that this could be Russian disinformation, and you had the previous example of an election seeming to get derailed by
But
something
the second
similar.
you say that, like, there might be reasons, but somebody is making, a human is making a judgment call, and certainly the way you present it is, your take is, if it were my call to make, that's probably what I would do. I think that's the thing, that's certainly the thing that made me uncomfortable, of like, whoa, that feels like you're
let's
running
just-
a much higher risk scenario.
Let's make it even more realistic, because now, what am I doing now with respect to the laptop, right? Like, I've not done a podcast on the Hunter Biden laptop yet, right? It's been now with us for years. It's conceivable that I could. I mean, I still don't find the topic interesting enough, given the political environment, that I care all that much. I mean, because for me, it was a very straightforward calculation. Here we have a sitting president who I knew to be unqualified in all kinds of ways, but the specific problem for me at that point was, we have a sitting president who is not committing to a peaceful transfer of power, right? That was a 5-alarm fire politically. I mean, that was as bright a line as I needed to say, this is an emergency, right? This guy can, this is, now it's not an emergency such that we could do anything to stop him, right? I'm not saying that the New York Times should have printed lies about him, right? I'm not saying that it absolutely did not require lying or even a shading of the truth. It's just, here's a guy who on multiple occasions has been asked point blank on television, will you commit to a peaceful transfer of power? And he in so many words, he said no. It's like, if I win, it will be a valid election, right? That's basically what he said.
So let me ask, what do you think about, people want him elected still? Like, he's
Right.
still, theoretically, as we're recording this, is the prime contender for the Republican nomination.
And that's, so that, just to close the loop on what I just said, that's why I'm not, among other reasons, that's perhaps I haven't thought much about it, but that is why I'm not so motivated to spend a lot of bandwidth, or any bandwidth, trying to figure out what's so wrong with Biden and the Biden family, right? Now, I have no doubt there are politically inconvenient, embarrassing, even shocking things to discover. I mean, certainly in Hunter Biden's life and his behavior. I mean, I'm sure there's no end to embarrassment there. But even some degree of implication with President Biden, is that possible? Is it conceivable? Is there something there that I just haven't freed up the bandwidth to pay attention to coming out of that laptop? I'm sure there are many people in Trumpistan who could speak for an hour about all the things they think we know based on that laptop. But I certainly doubt some of that. But why am I not motivated to pay more attention to that? Because, just as you said, Trump could very well come back in 2024. Like,
I don't think that, I really, maybe I'm just not explaining well. I don't think that's where people get the friction. Where they get the friction is the sense of, it's one of the earlier questions that I asked. I think you either believe that the people can sort through this themselves and figure things out, and you put the trust in the hands of people, or, and I think your position is clear, and so tell me if I'm getting this wrong. So either the people en masse, just give them the information, they'll sort it out, or we need experts, which people are going to read elites, right? Which is not a charitable interpretation, but that's how they hear it. Or we need a group of elites that are better than us plebes and go figure it out. I think that's what they hear when you say that. Now, I get what you mean about experts, but I know that even the most well-intentioned expert has a propensity to be wrong, that I just feel like the mistake I would rather make, going back to my trifecta of evil, the thing I'm most afraid of is authoritarian rule. So in that moment, I go, oh God, these are both terrible situations. But I really feel like you have to put the hands in the people. You have to leave it with them. If they let them see all the information, and yes, I know it's calculated.
But there is no seeing all the information, right? There is no unmoderated, pure, just fire hose of information. I mean, the information doesn't exist as a unitary object that can be contemplated in its totality, always in proportion to what it is in fact in reality.
Makes me a little nervous. You do have it is so specific, a laptop. Maybe it's Russian disinformation. Turns out it wasn't, but maybe. But you have this thing. It becomes so concrete and so tangible. I think that's why there's so much attention on that thing. But so I just want to get to your principle versus my principle, because I don't. Again, I don't know either of us are right.
My principle here is that, again, I mean, I stand by everything I said on that original podcast. I just didn't say it especially well there. And so people are genuinely confused about what I was recommending.
Can I say it so I know if I understand?
Yeah.
That what was going on is it was a real emergency. You had a real emergency. You have a president who was not committing to the peaceful transfer of power. Our democracy was truly at risk. Our democracy is the most important thing in this scenario. A laptop comes out. First of all, it could be Russian disinformation. We don't know yet. And so it would be foolish in the same way that if the Russian guy that sees the 5 nuclear weapons getting shot at him, for him not to pause and go, this just doesn't make sense, I'm not going to do it. In that moment, it was far wiser to not put this in front of the public, but instead to go, the risk reward ratio is off. Hold off.
Also, because there was no rush. There's still no rush. Like, again, I still haven't done it.
But I want to make sure, did I accurately convey how you think through that problem?
Well, but the crucial thing is, people took from that podcast clip, people took away the impression that I was advocating that we lie about Trump, right? That we say that we...
It felt that way. So as somebody watching the whole thing, not the clip, the whole thing, I walked away going, okay, I get where Sam is coming from. If you really believe that this is an emergency, that this will disrupt, honestly, if all of that were true, emergency, he's going to steal an election, it is going to jeopardize our democracy, and all I have to do is hide the laptop or buy time, create a smokescreen. If I really believed that all of that was true, man, I'd be very tempted. Now, it's just my obsession with this trifecta books and the rule that makes me
so if it's a sufficient emergency, you should want the guy assassinated, right? I mean, like it goes all the way. Like if this guy's Hitler, well then we all wish Hitler got assassinated, right? Now I don't think Trump is Hitler or anything like Hitler. So there is
and can you precog him? That's where I get nervous. Like everybody's so quick to say that he really is Hitler, and it's like,
no, he's I know. Well, I don't know how much harm he could ultimately do, but he shows no sign of being ideological in any way, and it shows no sign of wanting to take on a kind of world building or dismantling project.
People, and that makes my radar.
People want what?
People want him. So this may illuminate the difference. So because some people want to elect him, I'm like, damn, is there something I'm missing? And so because I know I could be flawed, I'm just like, then you have to let the people decide.
Well, no, you have to let the people decide. I would argue we still don't entirely know what's up with that laptop, right? It's like, I know there are people who think they know, but like, I don't actually know what sort of forensic analysis has been done of that laptop and how reliable that is and what the scope of fraud is there really. And I'm still unaware of anything that has surfaced from that laptop that is clearly a smoking gun that implicates Biden in corruption in a way. Like there's new information coming out in recent weeks. I don't know what the relationship that is to the laptop, but if there's a 20 megaton scandal in that laptop, it still hasn't reached me, and it's been over a year, right? But again, I default back to my original position, which is the fact that Trump wouldn't commit to a peaceful transfer of power, and we in fact didn't have a peaceful transfer of power, and he's now running again. That to me is so disqualifying that I'm not inclined to do anything that could possibly increase his chances of getting elected, right? So again, he's not Hitler, but I think he's someone who is totally committed to subverting all the norms of our democracy for purely personal avarice and just his malignant narcissism. I mean, it's just he really is a pure case study in that. But again, not ideological, not especially ambitious in any of the ways that somebody like Hitler or Stalin was. But it's so corrupting of our politics and so destabilizing of the institutions we should care about in our democracy that I think having him for a second term could well be a total disaster. And it's just such an awful precedent to have someone who didn't commit to a peaceful transfer of power, basically saw to it that we didn't have one. Worse still, really did try to steal the election, all the while claiming it was being stolen from him, right? I mean, the stuff he was trying to do behind the scenes, the pressure he was putting on Mike Pence, all of that was a genuine effort to steal an election he knew he had lost. I mean, all of the people, his attorney general, people behind the scenes got it through to him that he had actually lost, and he was still willing to just bluff his way back into the presidency. That's so disqualifying, and should be so disqualifying from my point of view, is that, yeah, do I want to do 3 hours on just how awful Joe Biden is? No. Right now, I don't think Joe Biden should be running for president. He's way too old, right? He's obviously past his, not just his prime. It's just like, it's a disaster, right? And I think Kamala is I mean, I can't see a scenario in which she's electable. So like if he dies or if anything, happens to his health that's so catastrophic that he's no longer the candidate and she is, I think that's just, that's just a red carpet rolled out for Trump or really anyone to become the Republican president. So I think it's totally irresponsible and dangerous that the Democrats have put us in this position, that we're running Biden with Kamala Harris being his VP with no alternative, really. I mean, maybe there would be, maybe if he died today, then maybe Gavin Newsom or somebody would step up and we would have a different race. But the fact that we seem to be running Biden by default with Kamala Harris really set to inherit, to some significant degree, half the country will be seeing her as the person who's running because they plausibly wouldn't expect him to survive his term. All of that's a disaster. All of that is well worth criticizing. I don't want to touch it because what's the alternative? Like, I mean, if I saw an alternative that I could advocate for, right, could it all be effective? If I saw an upside in criticizing Biden validly, then I would do it. But this is a pure pragmatic case where I'm deciding first do no harm, right? And it comes exactly back to the some fat people are healthy principle, right? Where if you're at a moment where something really is going to turn on people getting their head straight around diet and health and exercise and body image, and the clock is ticking, right? We have got 10 days to get this right. It's like and a lot hangs in the balance. Do you really want to do a podcast on here are all these fat people who we've just tested them and they're as healthy as any Olympic athlete, right? They got their lipids are perfect, their VO2 max is great, they look fat, but this is not what it seems, right? No, and what about let's do 100 podcasts on that topic, right? Which is what people have done around COVID and ivermectin and mRNA vaccines, right? Like, Brett Weinstein literally did 100 podcasts in a row on ivermectin and mRNA vaccines, right? As though there was no other topic in the world worth paying attention to. That seemed...
It made me feel like I was getting all the information. I didn't just assume he was right, but
Right.
it really helped me feel, and I watched a lot of those podcasts. It really made me feel like, okay, at least somebody's talking about this. It felt like pirate radio. And
Right.
as we're talking, I think I now understand. One, I think it's very important that I love about you that you say what you believe, and it doesn't matter whether I or somebody else would love to nudge you in another direction. But truly, as somebody who thinks you're amazing, I will just say that I think now through this conversation, I realize what I want your particular mind to do, because you are so good at this. What I would rather have seen is okay, I'm going to look at this laptop and whatever it says, and I'm going to break it down and I'm going to explain all the stuff you just went through about Kamala. This is crazy. In no uncertain terms, I want them to win, but you can't hide from information. Let's just pull this out into light. Let's pull Trump out into light. Look, guys, in the final analysis, the laptop is fucking crazy. It does seem to indicate that there's some connection to whatever you find, right? I'm riffing here, not saying this is actually what it says. And then, but look, the Trump thing is 1,000 times worse. This one feels like a real emergency. And then I'm like, oh, that's the Sam that I know, who's just like coldly dispassionate about this is this.
But
you can weigh these
I
things.
am being coldly dispassionate. I'm just and I'm being completely transparent.
You're
I mean,
being also strategic, and that's the part where I think it gives people that sense.
but it's not a hidden strategy, right?
Fair.
Like it's just
Very
I'm
fair.
just telling you why I don't see an upside in talking about certain things, because again, there are asymmetries here that are really strange, but they're incredibly powerful. Like so,
Can I tell you what the upside about talking about it?
but
with
let me
you?
just add this one piece.
Yep.
There's almost nothing you can say about Trump that is true and awful that his supporters care about.
That's crazy.
Right. So and yet, so he functions by a completely different reputational physics. And I think many people in that ecosystem do too. Like again, I mentioned Tucker. It's like he's not paying a penalty with his audience the way I would pay a penalty with my audience if similar revelations came out about me. And over here you have somebody like Barack Obama. Literally, it was a 48-hour scandal when he wore a tan suit. Right? I mean, like that was a level where he was getting dinged. Trump is a completely different situation. So it's somewhat, again, coming back to the fat analogy. We know that there's an appetite to eat junk food. We know certainly most people who have not already made it a habit to exercise, they're hard to motivate. They're hard to get into the gym. Most people join gyms and then they lapse. Not everyone gets addicted to working out. We know that there's a center of gravity to where people are stuck. We've got a problem with something like 40% of Americans are actually officially obese and like 60% are overweight, something like that. Right. So it's like we know that it's hard to get through to people, and even if you get through to them, it's really hard for them to change their behavior, even if they decide they want to change it, to make these changes. So then you have to ask yourself, okay, just how sexy do we want to make the message that some fat people are as healthy as anyone alive?
I get it, man, but there's second and third order consequences. So my thing is,
I'm not saying you lie about it.
No, I didn't hear you say that.
I'm just saying, like, do you want it to make your
But
next project is to get the message out on that topic? Of all the messages, you could be dealing with child trafficking, you could be dealing with climate change, you could be helping people
I'm not
actually
arguing
get
whether
fit.
you should do a podcast about it. So if that's what people have been pushing on you, not at all what I'm pushing.
They think I should talk to RFK Jr. They think I should have platformed all these
in
COVID
fairness,
skeptics.
I wish you would talk to RFK Jr. and I maybe give you insight into that. You probably already get it, but I want to outsource some of my thinking to you because I think you think through the world in a really interesting way. So rather than me have to go do the research in RFK Jr., I'd rather you do it.
Right.
So it's a factor of trust and just I look at other humans. People may fucking hate this, but I look at other humans as like a really specific AI, and I'm like, okay, I'm a specific AI to other people, right? But you're a specific AI that I use to think through certain problems. And so RFK just happens to be one of the problems I would love to see your AI go think of. Now you have to go do all the research and all that shit and combat him and bring the expert and all the things that you don't want to do. But that's why people would love to see you do that. And so that's where I'm like, the Sam Harris AI that I want to use just gives me all the facts about that laptop, gives me all the facts about Trump, and then just is more persuasive that Trump is going to be the bigger problem.
Well, again, but I know that certain bells can't be unrung, right? And
that's the part where, speaking for myself, I'm like,
and I know, but I know that there are super stimuli, right? Like I know that if I got on my podcast and said, my daughter has a vaccine injury, right? And I don't care what you think about me. She's never getting vaccinated again, and I'm done with all this, vaccine. Like, that's not science. That's not like. It doesn't matter if you get 10 prominent podcasters to tell 10 different stories just like that. That's not a sampling of the data space, right? And yet it is so powerful, right? It's so, and so you just have to you have to be aware of the rhetorical effect of kind of shining the light of your attention on certain things, and you have to be aware that though you are going to make a best effort to keep this information in proportion, right, or honestly convey the proportion that you think in fact exists in reality. If you frame it a certain way, or even if you speak about two things in the same context, that project becomes impossible. Like you just know that people are going to come away thinking, I forgot the details of that podcast, but I do remember that that vaccine is just dangerous. Yeah. Like Sam Harris said, it's just dangerous.
I get it. I get it. So my takeaway is just I don't know what comes of it. I think it's always better to say what is true. And there's
true. So I would filter. I totally agree with you. true and useful is the filter for me. I mean, that's it's like the Venn. It's not.
think
Truth is just too big. I mean, the Venn diagram, the circle for truth is so vast that we can't
useful to
possibly.
what? Useful to making sure Trump doesn't get elected is where you spin people out of control, which fine. You're
Well,
in this, you have been, I think, hyper consistent. I understand your position now completely.
Right.
And now my only thing is, I think you already understand it, so I can just wrap. I think you know why it bothers some people.
Well,
I think you're completely okay with
let's
that.
talk about those people. It certainly bothers the people who don't understand how shocking and untenable it was to have a sitting president not commit to a peaceful transfer of power.
Yes.
Like there are people who just don't even know he did that, or don't think it mattered. There are people who think that January 6th was a non-event. There are people who think that the election was actually stolen from Trump. So there's like lots of confusion around all this. So those people, so some percentage of those people are just frankly confused, and if they had the right information, they would see it the way I do. Most of those people are essentially in a personality cult, right? It's a pure expression of tribalism. It's not Republican. It's not establishment Republican tribalism, but it's a populist awakening on the right, which is not the right we are used to, but it's not even conservative in many respects, but so that's why I refer to it as like Trumpistan. But it's a kind of personality cult, which, yeah, I can't reason with those people. I mean, I can't. Like I've said enough. Like if they want to understand what I think is true, there's 20 hours on my podcast where I explain what I think is true about all that, and they're very likely not going to agree for reasons that impressively resemble sort of the birth of a new religion. It's like this is like me talking to Muslims about how the Quran is probably not the direct word of the creator of the universe. Like we're not going to agree, right? Like I lost them in my first sentence, and so does the Christians and Jews and everybody else. But so you mentioned AI. So one thing AI could, in completely destabilizing everything else, it could somehow resolve this very much in my favor, in that what it might do, I mean, let's forget about existential risk and the other deeper concerns, but just it could, in the near term, could so fully pollute our information landscape with just fake information, right? So deep fakes and fake journal articles and fake sources to things that, people will write, seemingly totally compelling articles about everything, mRNA vaccines and everything else, and they'll be sourced with stuff that none of it exists, right? It's just a pure confection of AI gibberish that we might all have to default to just very straightforward, old school gatekeepers of information. Otherwise, we're going to recognize that the internet is completely broken and we just don't know what's real. So like it's in a world of endless deep fakes, I'm really going to have to rely on the New York Times or Getty Images or Apple or somebody with just way more resources than I'm ever going to have on my own to tell me what's real. If I see video of Putin saying that he's just launched his tactical nukes, right, or he's going to do it tomorrow at 4 o'clock, and I have to worry about a world, and I think we do now, and if we don't now, it's 4 months from now we're going to have to worry about this. A world where basically anyone who wants to can produce a perfectly compelling video of Putin that will be undetectable by me as a fake. What are we going to do with that? I think we're all basically going to declare something like epistemological bankruptcy and just say, like, I don't know what's true anymore. Like I don't care. Like I'm not going to react to this video. The fact that Elon tweeted it, and it's just raw video on Twitter, or it's got it came from. It aired on a Dallas, news station, a local news station, and it's like I just have to wait to see what the real gatekeepers say about this. I'm going to give this 24 hours before I even think I know anything. And how am I going to know anything? Is it going to be me with my, blockchain algorithm that got democratized by that I read about on on some blog, where I'm now figuring out whether this video has the right watermark, so it's got digital provenance, or I'm just going to very likely there's going to be a few institutions that prove that they can figure out whether a video is real. Right now, maybe this particular use case is going to be fully democratized, and we're all going to just have a plug into our browser.
So one, I think that the way that it will really play out is the platforms that show video and images will build into their infrastructure the ability to read the blockchain signature, and so you'll very quickly know, like, is this authentic from the source? And then the other part will be a community notes like function where people can say, yes, it's real, but here's the context that you need so that you're not manipulated. Now, both of those speak to the wisdom of the crowd and the right place for something to be truly democratized.
But the crowd, the LLMification of the crowd the crowd's going to get so much larger. And
because you think there'll be a lot of bots?
Yeah, I mean, like the crowd could be literally 99% AI.
It will be tough if you're spinning up what Elon has done and you charge whatever $8 or $9. It's suddenly a bot farm.
But almost nobody's doing that, right? Like what's like 500,000 people are paying for Twitter, and out of 300 million.
Yeah, but when you think about what defenses we have when things really start to break, right now they think he's just being a dumbass and he shouldn't have bought it, and so they're not going to pay it because they're stubborn.
Right.
But if they realize, oh, he actually wasn't fucking around, the bots really are a problem, and by spending $7, I can verify that I'm a real human, and now we're back in business. Then I think people are far more likely to do it. But I think the avalanche of fake things that are coming are going to come in so hot and so fast, and it's not just going to be people like me and and you have thousands of hours of us out there. People have already cloned my voice. You can hear me speaking in Portuguese and I think Italian. I didn't do it. Somebody else did it. And it literally sounds like me. So that's gonna happen. But it's also gonna happen revenge porn, where a disgruntled boyfriend makes porn from his ex-girlfriend and it is indistinguishable. And so everybody very fast is gonna have a reason to care. Now, the moment I worry about the whatever 6 to 12 months it will take to embed the infrastructure in each of the things to read the watermark and to say this is real, not real, and to filter out things that aren't real. But that will, barring that sort of naked year, you will very rapidly, because it will be so detrimental to just each individual, people will adopt that technology, I think, pretty fast. I just worry that this all happens right in time for the 2024 election.
Yeah. No, I'm worried about that too. Seems like the right time frame for it.
It's crazy. I mean,
Like
it makes me feel like I'm in a
a
simulation.
year of ChatGPT or GPT-4, maybe 5, and yeah, no, it's 2024 could be all too interesting.
Yeah.
No doubt.
How do you think about preparing for that? Like, how do we get ready?
Well, who's we and what is ready?
Americans,
Yeah.
so that we're thinking well through the problem.
Well, I hope that, I mean, I can imagine this is a major priority of people currently in government, that we're doing everything we can to ensure that the election is run in such a way that there's the least opportunity to worry about election fraud. Now, I don't think election fraud is, I think most concerns about election fraud are generally imaginary, but I think we need a system where there's just no scope to worry that the election was not run properly. The fact that we can't figure, the fact that we're finding that that's so hard to figure out, to the degree that we are, I'm actually not close to current efforts to shore all that up, but I got to imagine, I mean, that has to be the number one priority. Whatever happens, and shattering of democratic norms, that it's we have to get over that hurdle, and we have to stay over it. There can't be some new concern that surfaces that you can hack our voting machines. I mean, that has to be, the integrity of elections has to be the paramount concern. If we solve that, then at least we have, okay, then we're at the mercy of whoever we ran and whoever won, right? And there, I just think you have, if Trump is in fact the candidate, I think we have to, I think it would be a terrible precedent to reward someone who's behaved as recklessly as he's behaved and as dishonestly as he's behaved with a second term in the White House. I mean, it just would be insane that we have, if in fact we have a majority of Americans who would want to see that happen. I mean,
Do you think long form podcasting could change the landscape of who gets nominated?
Yeah, because many podcasts have audiences that are larger than any other form of media. I mean, certainly Rogan's does.
By a country mile.
Yeah, but again, I think Joe and everyone else in a similar position, even at whatever fraction thereof, anyone with a significant platform like that needs to be more responsible than most people are tending to be. Again, it's like, I mean, Joe may think he's just shooting the shit with friends, but he's actually not. He's educating or miseducating tens of millions of people on every topic he touches, right? So there's a responsibility that comes with that, and it's not. So I think I don't think Joe has been. I mean, I think he's been less careful than he should have been on specific topics. I mean, I think it was true during COVID, and it's been true on certain political points. But I mean, generally speaking, I think his heart is in the right place, and he's not. His format is such that the people who are going to be, I mean, people are given ample opportunity to discredit themselves in that context, right? So there's just, but I do think if he were going to take seriously the impact he's having and can have, I think he'd be more careful on specific topics than he has been, right? And I think it would be a good thing for him to be more careful. And then there are people who have similar platforms, like Elon, who I think are being totally reckless, right? I mean, I just think his behavior on Twitter has been unconscionable in how he has amplified bad information, pseudo information, lies, and denigrated real information. And it's just, and it's not, again, I don't put this on him. It's not in a systematic way. It's just in a reckless way. He's not even paying attention to what he's breaking or what he's signal boosting. It's like he's not. It's like an adolescent attitude toward the safeguarding of real things. It's like we have a world where the difference between our succeeding in this common project of building a civilization that works and our failing is like that gulf is so enormous, and given that basically all of our problems are the result of failures of human cooperation. I mean, like everything that's just not an asteroid that's going to cross the path of Earth, and even with an Earth-crossing asteroid, human cooperation is the answer to that problem. It's like there's almost no problem we could have that in the limit we can't. I mean, if it's compatible with the laws of nature for that problem to be solved, I think our understanding the problem and collaborating in its solution is going to solve it. Now, it may not, conveniently, we may not have the time we need to solve it, right? Like if we find out about an asteroid and it's, 15 days away, we don't have enough time to get up there and divert it, right? But if we had 15 years or, 30 years, presumably we would have the time we needed to solve this problem.
Have you read Ian Bremmer's book, The Power of Crisis?
No, but I've spoken with Ian. I think I probably spoke with him before that book came out, but he's been on my podcast several times, so I have the gist of his thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, so he unnerves me a little bit. I had him on the show and he was great and I was very honored to do it, but it unnerves me a little, the idea that we need some sort of crisis, what he calls a Goldilocks crisis, that's big enough to be really devastating, but not so big that we can't overcome it.
No, I hope that's wrong. Yeah, I don't think we need that. What I'm saying though is what we need adults in the room. And we need the most powerful, we need the luckiest, most powerful, most influential, the people who command the most resources, and the people who command the most of our bandwidth, right? The people who command most human attention at the moment to behave responsibly, right? Elon is not doing that. And I'm not talking about the decisions he's made as CEO of Twitter. I'm talking about his behavior on Twitter, right? It's just, it's very Trumpian, right? It's like all for the lulz, right? He's just shitposting. He's just spreading memes. He's just fucking around. But he's touching real things. Like, when he speculates that his former head of trust and safety is a pedophile, right? And just kind of freewheels on Twitter about that. He completely deranges this guy's life. I think Yoel Roth had to move as a result of all the death threats he got, right? That is completely predictable. I mean, the reason why I thought Trump should have been kicked off Twitter long before he was not because of his politics or how I viewed his presidency or anything. It was he was doing this on Twitter. He was singling out specific citizens for abuse when it was absolutely predictable, given his platform, given the nature of his fan base, it was absolutely predictable that those people would then have just excruciating security concerns, possibly for the rest of their lives, right? It was just like death threats and people doxing them and people showing up at their houses and at their kids' schools, and it was